What I'm talking about here is part of helpful libraries, our helpful libraries project. I also pasted a link to that in the chat, and specifically it's LINQ2DB sub-project pretty much. Now, the use case is that sometimes you just have to go to SQL. So although we have SQL, we have all the abstractions, but of course the SQL connection is still there if you want to go low level. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about cases where you do something with content items, because that usually should happen via SQL anyway. But sometimes you have to write some funky queries there, or otherwise you just want to store something in the database, which is not a content item, not necessarily an entity, just a simple table with simple rows, that's it. And in that case, you may not want to write like SQL queries as strings. And but still, you don't want to use a full-blown ORM like entity framework, because that would be a bit of an overkill for use cases where you don't need a full-blown application built on it. And for such cases, there is a library called LINQ2DB. This is not developed by us. It's a third-party one. It's pretty much a LINQ abstraction over SQL, but without anything else. So it's not a full ORM. It's kind of a mini ORM, but it's a bit more than, like, let's say, Dapper. And what we have implemented here is that by just hooking into ISession, so the standard SQL ISession, you will get to write queries like this. So there's a helper method, and in there you can pretty much write LINQ against tables. In this case, we are using author-out part index as the example. Usually that's not what you would do, because there are easier ways around it. But this was, one table that's already built into which is easy to use. And as you can see, it's LINQ as usual, but since we are wrapped into this LINQ query async, this inside here is actually executed as SQL directly. You can also use the query syntax of LINQ. So a bit more involved would be a join query, as you can see here, within the content item index and author-out part index tables. Still, everything is statically typed, so you don't have to remember names, you don't have to type in fields. Everything is just nicely auto-completed and statically typed, as you are used to with the SQL even. And that's the point of it. You can write statically typed queries, and we are actually executing read queries here, as both of them are just selects. But LINQ2DB also offers data manipulation. So the whole CRUD is available. So I find it actually very, very useful to do simple SQL or simple DB access. It's not necessarily simple queries. These queries can be very, very complex. That's another reason why we started this, because some of our queries got really complex and it got unmaintainable in just string forms. So this is it. My colleague Mark and Christian developed this mostly. I'm just showing it to you. So I hope it will be useful for others as well when you are writing some SQL queries.
Questions? Should I start, or does anyone else have questions?
It seems, please start.
I will start. So why based on ISession and not a DB connection?
We could also use that. This seemed like a better API. It doesn't matter, that would be also possible.
Because ISession is the SQL thing, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. And in this case, I assume you just get the connection or the transaction from that.
Yep.
So yeah, so here session begin transaction. Maybe there is a reason, but we made an abstraction for that, like IDB something. You can resolve IDB connection directly or iTransaction, something like that.
Yeah,
or iTransaction provider, so accessor, something like that. That will.
That as well. I think with IDB connection accessor, you can just create a new connection or something. We used ISession because that's widely available. So it was common, at least in our use cases, that we do something with ISession in the same class, and we needed to issue a query directly to SQL. So it was easy to just access that. But yeah, this is not actually mandatory. We could have different extension methods that hook into that.
Also here, what I see is that you do begin transaction async on the session, which will start a transaction, even for reads. So
isn't that we actually wanted to access the transactions and demand it, but I think this changed in the last few months, and there's no way to do that.
Because ISSQL, since this big breaking change that you say that there is no more the demand transaction async, is not creating a transaction if you just do reads until you do an operation that will require a write, like updating an index or doing some changes on an object, and then it will start the transaction for these operations. And I did that based on feedback I got from the EF team developers, saying that it was a big issue in terms of locking for SQL Server, that you start transactions for reads, because it will lock the tables even on reads this way. And they say this is what they do now. They don't create a transaction for read-only operation. So that might be a problem for high load or even transactions that are long on reads, like complex queries. It might lock the thing if you call .begin transaction async. And that's why maybe it would be interesting to just get the connection and create the transaction if you need to, and not ask SQL to do that all the time. That might be even more for a read in this case, right? Because I assume this.
Yeah. Well, you can use the same thing to actually issue writes, but yeah, actually what we wanted to do is get the current transaction and not open a new connection. We don't necessarily need a new transaction even.
Yes, and there might be no current transaction. That might be why that it's not more in the interface, because it will depend. You can begin one, but you can't ask for the existing one because it might be created lately. So here you're always creating. If there is one, SQL will use it. So by calling begin, you will be in the same transaction as the rest of the thing in SQL. But yeah, maybe it should be, I don't know. That.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to work around that, because we do need a transaction that's necessary for LINQ to DB, even for reads.
Yeah, that seems surprising that transaction there.
Yeah, even Dapper, it's optional to have a transaction when you do a query. Maybe it's optional here also. I'm sure if you hover the LINQ DB connection, maybe it's not required to have a transaction.
Oops. I will need to link it in. Probably this is our thing actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's why I can't remember why we have this, but we surely need it for some reason. Anyway, I will look into it. The point was not to have a separate transaction, but we do need a transaction, not to have a separate connection, not to have a separate transaction, but we do need one, I think. But thank you. That's good to know. I will look into that.
And I think we measured that, actually, the perf difference without transaction. And also, some people complain about locks. And this is when I asked the EF team, what do you do? And they mentioned that, do not have transactions in the reads. That's why we changed it in SQL. Okay, so that, then data connection, get data provider, get database provider name. So you need to get the database provider because you generate different dialects. Okay, that's good. That will adapt itself. So is LINQ, does LINQ2DB does that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, one funny advantage here is that it also creates well-formatted SQL. The SQL you see being visible there in Mini Profiler, for example, is nice and readable.
Okay.
Cool. So by hooking into that existing SQL connection, you're still getting stuff through Mini Profiler with it as well, are you?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that, Dean. I was just asking that because you're connecting through the SQL connection, you're still getting your SQL through Mini Profiler, through the Mini Profiler connection with it.
Yeah.
So just asking for confirmation.
Yeah, it works with Mini Profiler.
Convenient. Yeah.
Yeah, the DB connection accessor will do the same thing. It's just returning the connection. I believe it's. Oh, do you think it's just create a connection?
Yes. Yeah. That's why we couldn't use it.
Really. But that would still work. And I think, well, but that's okay. Why don't you just create a connection instead? Because I mean, it's just creating a connection, but technically it's just pulling the connection from the pool. So the only thing might be that, yes, in the same request, you might have two different connections if you use both SQL and that, I get it. Okay. Yeah. But if it's your own, if it's your own controller, usually it's just your own connection.
Well, in a single case like this, yes, but if you have like widgets being loaded, or I don't know, the user account, you would open a second one.
Yeah, and here it's more than the connection that you want, because you might want the transaction in this case.
I guess if you're doing updates with it, then having the SQL connection means you connect into the SQL cancel async, possibly, that we dispose of at the end of the session. That would be something just to
the same transaction
think about that. Yeah,
but that's good too.
It's convenient, probably.
Database is hard.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. How would you hook into, or what would you hook into the cancel of the transaction? Why?
So the session itself is a scoped object. And when you call cancel on the session, it will cancel the transaction.
Yeah.
So if you use the same transaction as SQL, if there is a cancel that is called in the session, it will also cancel your content of the transaction, your part of the transaction that you did your queries. And it's important, for instance, when you click save, when you publish something, but something goes wrong. Like one of the modules in the driver says, nope, can't do. So you need to cancel the transaction. And when you call cancel so Orchard will do that for you. If there is an exception, it will call cancel on the session. So it will cancel the transaction, including all the things that every driver, every module decided to do. So if you use the same transaction, then you will also be cancelled. That's good.
Yeah, that's good. That's what we want. All right, so it seems that if we can somehow live without a transaction, then it might be possible.
That's an optimization to provide to the end user, because they might know that it's just a read and they don't want to enlist in a transaction in this case.
Yeah, and is there any API that we can use to get the current transaction? Not create one, but get that. That's it.
Because you can't, you don't know. Because when you ask for it, maybe there is still not a transaction, but later on another module will do a save on a content item, and then a transaction will be created.
Sorry, I was meaning a connection, not a transaction.
Oh, connection, to get an existing connection?
Yeah, there should always be one.
I will not, create one. Do the DB accessor and get it from the DB accessor. Maybe the DB accessor is already returning the existing one if there is one from. I'm checking the code right now.
Yeah, it's a good point about the connection pool, because, well, it will surely use that.
The connection accessor, I think we documented it. The Orchard data abstraction. Example, IDB connection accessor. There is a create connection, I see, create connection. So it's creating another connection. And then you can do building transaction, I see. So, and I think it's the same with YesSQL. You can't get the existing connection because it only exists if you do something.
Okay, so that's lazy as well.
So that might also be the reason.
Will it reuse the same connection?
The ISSQL connection is lazy when you're doing selects, like listing stuff.
Yeah.
It's only ever created if you actually invoke save on anything. So knowing that, you may find that I'm not sure what you're doing with the update stuff because you haven't demoed anything to do with that. Does that just run through the same LINQ query async, or is that a different operation where you know that you're doing it right intentionally? Zoltan.
Well, what's ideal what's happened here is that we get the DB, or it's a get or create for the DB connection, and later YesSQL uses that as well. But we also support writes, so we actually have to do transactions. Okay,
maybe you need two extension methods, maybe one that creates one for write, one for read.
Yeah, we'll need to sync through the API here.
Start without a transaction and be able to upgrade to a transaction by calling something, by saying, oh, I'm starting to write something. So
yeah, I will need to look into that, because it's a very simple API in LINQ to DB, so you can seamlessly make the query into a write one, more or less. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for the idea.
They didn't think about it either. Like the fact that you should not create transactions just for reads, it was new to me, honestly, because I was reading Ryan's blog post from like 10 years ago on .NET, because he was writing an Hibernate also, and he said that in an Hibernate, I think it also creates a transaction for reads. But after I talked to the EF team, it didn't make sense, because it's looking on reads, and it doesn't even, and the transaction isolation in SQL Server, for instance, doesn't even support what you think it will do. It's a setting on the SQL server itself, like it's a server setting. It's not even based on what code you write that it will do what you think it will do. And this is when I decided to not do transactions for reads. So it's very edge case. Yeah. So maybe even LINQ has this issue. It will work if you create a transaction, but you will have more locks and less performance.
Yes.
And you've seen these locks, right, on high load, when it says, oh, timeout exception could not acquire whatever, because the table is locked just for reads. And we even got a report 2 weeks ago from a big user of Oddshot Core on their site. And they were using the previous version of YesSQL with the transactions and reads. So I asked them to first update to the new version of Oddshot, the 1.0, at least 1.0, to get that patch in the new YesSQL version, just to confirm it was the issue.
And was it?
I'm still waiting for the answer, but I'm pretty sure it's that, because this was the thing that the EF devs told me that would happen, like locks on reads. Which sounds crazy. But it makes sense, like when you have so much load and the query can be slower, and then the timeout is like, nope, I can't do that, it's locked.
Yeah, that makes sense. But thank you. I didn't think about that. We'll need to rethink this a bit.
Database is hard. Okay. And then you have SQLite, SQL Server, PostgreSQL. They all have different logics and ways to behave. It's crazy. Okay, good.
Cool little extensions though. Sultan looks good. Interesting.
Thank you.
Some other examples that might be replaced by things like these are for the Lucene index. We do that. We do direct access to database, not through YesSQL. We use Dapper, and we write the SQL by hand, or half of it by hand. There are some updates. There are some inserts and some selects in this code, because we create a custom table and we write directly there. So, but we use Dapper. I didn't want to inject another dependency. YesSQL injects the Dapper dependency, so that's why it's for free. I didn't want to inject another dependency to do that. It was a simple select query, so that's something to look into, to see what we do and how it can behave or be replaced by LINQ or whatever. And where do we do that also? I think that's the only location I can remember. The Lucene index, the table that contains all the content items that have changed historically, so we know which items we need to index. And it's not using YesSQL. It's just a raw table. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Other questions, comments? I should store the link. And this is the page that describes the DB connection thing with the IDB connection accessor. Create connection. See, this is the one here. You want your custom queries not using SQL, and for reference, indexing. Injecting DB connection accessor, create connection, so it's isolated, so it's closing it after that block. It's getting the dialect. Select, oh, this is SQL builder, so YesSQL comes, is it in YesSQL? Or is it in Oddshot Core?
Or Oddshot Core.
Yeah.
Oh no,
the SQL build was in YesSQL.
Yeah, the dialect is in, yeah. Yeah, the parser is in Untitled. Yeah. So here it's generating. So yeah, select the table selector is just the only thing that it does well here is using the table prefix, and you did that also in IntelliB. Where end and query, and then close the. There is no transaction. It's just a read. It's opening a connection and closing it. And when I say opening, it's like if there is one open already, well, it's opening the connection, but it's reusing the connection from the pool, so it's cheap. And it doesn't have to be part of a transaction. So for reads, it's fine to create a connection and to query and to close it. Super cheap because there is no transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So that is fine. But here, boom, transaction, begin transaction because we are updating things. But it's not part of the YesSQL transaction, so it's a different transaction. And in this case, again, that's fine because it's just to update an index of things. So it might even be a background task.
I'll get in touch with the LINQ guys to see whether they are upgrading to transactions if necessary. From the code, I can't see that.
And here the SQL is the same for all dialects. That's also why we use handcrafted SQL. There is nothing special here. And then it's using Dapper. And parameters, so there is no injection possible. All good. Okay. Database is hard. Don't do your own ORM. Don't do your own CMS. Don't do your own ORM. No. Okay. I will just keep it